Well, Happy New Year, everyone. It is 2024, which I cannot believe how quickly
Yep.
2023 went. I think the saying goes, the days are long, but the years are short, something like that. And so,
Mm,
yeah, definitely
mm.
that was the case for me in 2023. So good to be on with y'all today. Welcome to the Unfazed, Unedited podcast, where we provide commentary on complicated topics in an uncomplicated format. I'm Dr. Shauna Payne Gold. I go by she, her, hers pronouns, and I am here with Dr. Lisa Ingerfield. How are you doing? And Happy New Year to you.
Yeah, happy new year to you. I'm doing okay. Still tentatively stepping into 2024. I do feel like 23 just disappeared in the blink of an eye, and that is concerning.
Exactly.
Yeah, so well, we're heading into my least favorite part of the year, January, February, March.
Hmm.
So these three
Yeah.
months will probably crawl along, and then once we get to April, things will probably like speed up, particularly in 2024, because we've got some big things happening in the
Yes.
world in 2024 that we will touch on here in a little bit. So I
Yes.
guess without further ado, then we should probably jump in, right?
Yeah, yeah. Let's speaking of that though, I think to your great point of the year speeding up and so forth, we've got a lot to look forward to in the DEI space in 2024. We are already here. We're thinking about what we want to focus in on, and there's some things that we just will not be able to escape from. And so I think there's at least three things that probably will come up for 2024 in particular. Of course, those of you who are long-standing listeners to Unfazed before it became Unfazed Unedited know that we were firmly planted in the endurance sports space when we first got started. And so, of course, we will not neglect Paris 2024. Sha'Carri Richardson, I'm all about that life right now. Okay. I am all about the track and field space. Super excited to see how she does, along with several other athletes that I've been following since their world championships. And so, I think it's going to be an interesting year for Paris, especially given that Paris was chosen from what Hamburg, Budapest, Rome, and LA, and they chose Paris. And so I think it's going to be a really interesting summer. I get so excited during that time of year because track and field, and of course, swimming, they're just my all-time favorites. I was a swimming Olympic swim fan before I even knew how to swim because they just made it look like it was the easiest thing ever. So you couldn't tell me that I wasn't like Michaela Phelps, as it were. And so, I'm just really excited because they're my favorite sports. Now, I do watch Winter Olympics, but I have more names that I know in Summer Olympics. So, Lisa, I don't know if you're ready to watch Paris, but doesn't it just make you feel like you can live vicariously through these people?
Yeah, and I can definitely appreciate the swimming because, I'm always like watching Katie Ledecky's stroke and I'm thinking, okay, like absorb through the television her stroke so that I can then implement it in the pool. Of course, I cannot because she's just unbelievably fast and amazing. Although I think she has some competition coming into this Summer Olympics, but
Yes,
you know that,
yes.
yeah. So the thing that's striking me about the Summer Olympics is that this is the first time that the Olympics, the Summer Olympics at least, is going to have the same number of men and women athletes and the same number of events for men and women. So up until 2024, that has not been equal. Men have had more slots and more events. Um, so I'm pretty excited about that. I mean, it's pretty monumental. Shocking that it's happening in 24, but monumental nonetheless. Nonetheless.
Yeah, those moments are always bittersweet for people who think like you and I, Lisa, because on one hand we're thrilled and on the other hand we're pissed off that we even have to be thrilled because it took this amount of time for it to happen. So, I'm grateful that it's happening. I'm grateful that the events are there. Um, I'm probably going to get myself in trouble by saying, oh, this is going to get interesting as the non-binary conversation continues to traverse the world. So we'll
Yep,
see
yep,
about
yep.
that, right?
Mhm, mhm.
Yeah, I'm very excited to watch that and always feel like I live vicariously. So that's one thing. The other thing too, of course, is that I appreciate all the actors, actresses, those that are involved in entertaining us and creating art for us, especially as they emerged from, a major protest for better pay, better benefits, and so forth. I'm grateful that the strike is over selfishly, but also for them as well. And at the same time, I know that completely opens the floodgates of all of the art that was created before the strike that now we get to see, whether it's on your favorite streaming platform or what have you. And a lot of it, I would suggest that most of it can hardly escape a DEI lens. So yeah, you could possibly watch
Yep,
Ibram X.
yep.
Kendi's, Stamped from the Beginning on Netflix, but there's also other things that, like Lisa, we have been dabbling into Black Cake, for example, that is just a whole mixture of identity groups, thoughts, experiences. So yeah, I'm excited about that just from a entertainment perspective. When I think I'm having some mental downtime and not thinking about DEI, I'm doing it doing it subconsciously by watching fun stuff. So I appreciate that floodgate opening as well.
Mhm,
And then
mhm.
of course, here we are, Lisa, back again. US presidential election. I mean, I know you got
Yep.
your degree in US civics and all that good stuff and focusing on it. Y'all, we jokingly say that she and I know more about each other's home countries than our own home country. So I'm all about the UK and she is all about the US, and we just continue like informing each other on both, which is incredible to me. But yeah, we got another election coming up, Lisa, and I could hardly
Right,
say that it's
right.
going to be less contentious than the past.
No, it's going to be a big one, and I think we'll definitely have a lot to talk about on this podcast as as things progress. Obviously, we have the Iowa caucuses coming up here in about 14, 13 days, so that's going to be interesting to see what happens there with the Republican nomination. But as we gain steam, as we move through the months, I think we are not going to be short of content, particularly because many of the candidates looking for the nomination on the Republican side are very eager to make cultural issues central, right? Because it fires up the
Yes,
base. It's like raw
yes,
meat in many ways.
yes,
And, the other side of that is that it's harmful and hurtful and um, diminishes the civil rights of a number of groups in the US. So I think that unfortunately we are going to have a lot to discuss that we're going
yeah.
to see manifest over the next several months. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And to your point on that, one thing that I hadn't thought about, but you brought it to my memory, and I've been kind of reading and getting to know a few documents. But um, you know, this year we just had the 75th anniversary of Human Rights Day and the Human Rights Initiative. And so I think what's interesting is that isn't it interesting how Human Rights Day happened back in December of 2023, but it's kind of this revival to revisit those principles as we think about global interactions with the world. And so I'm even wondering how some of those thoughts are going to play into the US presidential election, of things that many folks want to assume are a human right, where others might debate that point, even as they run for office. And so, that to me is going to get interesting too. Um, and then something I've been building up to, because my bank account has been telling me we've been building up to it. We are taking the boys on a educational trip to Japan, and I think I mentioned it in the episode where we talked about the possibility of ethical travel. And so, of course, we
Mhm.
had already
Yeah.
been planning
Yeah.
for that for months before you sent me the great podcast on being intentional about how we travel. And so that's coming up the end of June, going into July. And so I'm super excited to set foot on Asian ground for the first time ever in life. So this is going to be very interesting. Excited to see both the history and the technology that usually is kind of top tier. So super excited about that, and seeing it myself, but also seeing it through a soon to be 13-year-old and 10-year-old's perspective is going to be pretty cool too. So yeah, those are things I have to look forward to in 2024. And you and
Mm-hmm,
I
mm-hmm.
can Monday morning quarterback all of it if you like together.
Yes, that's the intention. And I think there's probably 1,000 other things that are gonna happen in 24 that we haven't highlighted here. Um, as we kind of grit our teeth and head into the year. But if any of you all listening to this have any particular issues that you are watching or you think that we should be paying attention to as well,
Yes.
do drop us a line and let us know that. Because where we
Yes.
sit at this early January date, um, there are some things we're probably missing. Because I think about our episode before when we were talking about DEI annoyances from 2023, and I was like, oh my gosh, cast my mind back to January, February, March 23. I can't even remember what happened.
Right.
So yeah,
Right.
yeah. So I think this is the opposite situation, that I'm not projecting effectively through the year to know what we have coming, but I know that there are going to be big ones.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
your Japan trip and the joy that you have there, and the joy with your kids
Yeah.
being exposed to a different culture and having that experience of international travel, I think will counteract or act as a counterbalance for some of the less joyful DEI related issues that we are most likely going to stumble across in 2024.
Yeah, yeah, I'm holding my breath that that is true, Lisa, because I remember traveling when I traveled to Spain the summer before George H.W. was elected,
Mm-hmm.
and most of the world was just not
Yeah.
phased by Americans. So having a flag on your backpack or your bag or your hoodie or what have you was an interesting time then. And so it kind of makes me
Mm,
think, ooh, this is going to be interesting traveling as an American during a year when, it's very easy to be painted that the loudest voice that you hear through the media in other countries is assumed to be how everyone feels about everything.
right. Right. Right.
And that's just not true, of course, in any election cycle. But yeah, it's going to be interesting traveling abroad for an extended period of time prior to a presidential election here. It's going to be interesting. We'll see.
Yeah, so that brings me to what I want to talk about into phase two, which is how the media covers contentious issues. Several weeks ago, I listened to a podcast about this, and it has kind of stuck with me this whole time. And there is this how do I want to say, like, commitment to quote unquote balance, and this belief that if you present a balanced perspective, so let's say, to put it simply, like two sides, right, of an argument, so you're presenting both, that they're balanced, and that is somehow fair and that is somehow objective. But I think what happens, and what I'm worried about happening this year, is that in pursuit of balance and fairness, problematic and in some cases dangerous positions or arguments are going to be given the same weight as arguments that are much more rational and grounded and concerned about humanity and democracy, right? And so an example I can show to show this would be climate change. So climate change, the science is there, right? There are like a bazillion scientists who agree that the climate is changing, and the increase in temperature, among many other things, is going to have catastrophic effects for the future of Earth, right? Like, this is just accepted. So we don't see now, really, hardly at all, an attempt to balance that perspective with climate deniers, right? With the people who are saying that it's made up, that it's not real, that this is just the natural cycle of things, right? Because the truth of this is that the climate is changing, and it's changing in a detrimental way, and it is because of human intervention that it is changing, right? And so, but I don't see that same coverage with other issues where the truth is pretty clear, but they don't but journalists or other media commentators don't want to seem biased or unbalanced, so they like elevate this other side, this quote unquote other side of the argument that is just terrifying, right? And so what that does is it like diminishes the terrifyingness of it, if that makes sense. And I'm really nervous as we head into a presidential election, but also thinking about all those DEI pieces um, that we talked about in 2023, right? The fact that diversity officers are getting fired, or that we can't talk about critical race theory anymore, like school curriculums are being changed, books are being banned. Like, these are, like, I think objectively terrible and scary things, and there's not really a equally level other side to that argument, right? Yet that's what I continue to see. So I don't know. That was kind of long-winded. I apologize, but I'm wondering what you think about that.
Well, no, you're bringing up a great point though around trying to balance something that is inherently imbalanced. There's no kind way to talk about certain oppression. There's no other than excluding it entirely for many people. But how do you report on something from a balanced perspective that inherently is imbalanced? It kind of reminds me of, I remember in undergrad, I wish I could remember the name of the book, but it was a book that was about economics, but it specifically talked about the economics of slavery as a economic system, right? And it wasn't even talking about specific African American slavery, because slavery existed all
Okay.
around the globe,
Right.
and
Right.
so you could pick on, whatever slavery version you wanted, but it was a book that gave specific economic understandings of, if you, I don't know, decrease the cost of labor, then you increase the profit. It's literally, plus and minus here. And if you're talking about issues of human beings and their value, then there are certain things that you can never dress up. It's that that saying, you can't put lipstick on a pig. I think that's what the saying is. It's like you can't dress it up. So, Lisa, in your line of work, when you're talking about uh violence in particular, whether it's domestic violence, sexual violence, intimate partner violence, I- i'm I am not an expert the way you are, but what I do know is that I'm not sure that it's possible to talk about any of that in a glowing positive way. So how do you create a balanced story around an imbalance in power? These are all imbalances in power, and so I'm not quite
Right.
sure that
Right.
the effort of the media to balance something that's inherently imbalanced is a fruitful war to wage, basically. I
Yeah.
don't, I'm not sure it can or should be done.
Yeah, and I think this is just, I just wanted to bring this up this episode because I think as we head into 24, we need to all do better to be critical consumers of the media, right? Rather than
Ah,
just kind of like,
yes.
reading and accepting information. And we've talked about this
Yeah.
before on some archived episodes, related to misinformation and disinformation, but it's more than that. It's right. It's how is a story constructed? How is it communicated? And are the quote unquote two sides that are presented equivalent, right? Because, in the example you gave there around slavery, I mean, what I'm hearing, and correct me if I'm not interpreting this correctly, is like one side is that, well, slavery is an economic system that's really beneficial, right? And the other side of the argument is slavery is morally horrendous because it is enslaving humans, um, and they are owned by other humans. So by talking about the economic system as beneficial or useful. You've just elevated those two sides to be the same when they're not actually the same at
Not at
all,
all.
right?
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly. And I
yeah,
remember even that author that wrote the book doing exactly what you just did, bracketing it by saying, I will never justify morally devaluing human beings. What I am doing as an economist is trying to share how folks got to a rationale. So it's kind of like saying, this is the morality of this conversation compared to my overall views. I'm giving you the math of it, even though every day, all day, and throughout the entirety of the book, cover to cover, I still will say, this should not happen and should never happen. So, I think again, it's that power play. No, we cannot create equitable power in those conversations when it just simply does not exist. So, I wonder from a media perspective for those that even strive to entertain the idea of trying to make something balanced, where's the personal reflection there to say this is not the right thing for me to do as a journalist? It's not even right for me
yeah,
to entertain
yeah.
the idea of having this discussion right now.
Right, and this like kind of rabid attachment to balance as though that is an ethical obligation and you're sidestepping any harm that you might be doing, right? Like it's
Mhm.
not about balance, it's about truth, right? Truth is what you should be after. And there isn't what's the opposite, what's the other side to a truth? A lie? Then so should we be elevating
Right.
lies as having equal weight to truth? And I know that that has happened, right? And so I think that
Mm,
I feel like focusing on balance is a rabbit hole that is a distraction that takes us off in the wrong direction because
mm,
we assume if something is not balanced, it's therefore biased. Well, not necessarily, right? And if we want to think about truth, and I know that there are
yeah,
debates about what is and is not true, but back to the climate change, right? I think for the most part,
right.
it's accepted that climate change is real and that is a truth, right?
That,
um,
yeah, yeah.
so, yeah,
Absolutely. Well, and to your point on that, with the folks trying to seek out this balance, we've talked about this ad nauseum when it comes to the white supremacy mindset, that it's invaluable if it's not balanced. When there are certain things that are inherently imbalanced. And so looking for this perfection of balance, I'm like, that's not going to serve you well because you're going to underserve certain voices and overserve others. We usually talk about underserving folk, and that we should continue to talk about that. But what about overserving? It's almost like saying, a million people said this when it was only like two. Like you're overstating, it
yeah,
for
yeah,
the pursuit of this balance that's elusive. I'm like, no, I'm not going to overstate a value when it's just not there. So, yeah, I think it's problematic. And I think, as I continue to try to be a conscious consumer of information, news, media, so forth, it's such a great question that you're bringing up, Lisa. Now I'm going to look at the news like, should we even be having this conversation? So it's yes, what's the content, but why the content? Why are we having this conversation? Why does this topic need to come up?
yeah.
So yeah, you got me thinking. Mm,
Yeah, yeah, and then how does this kind of framework of balance basically minimize some really terrifying things, right? Like critics say, well, no, critics don't say like the vast majority of the population think this is terrifying, right? So you don't need to
right,
like third person it with critics say, right? So yeah,
right.
so I do think let's all
Exactly.
be better at analyzing what we're seeing in the news this year because I think it's going to
Absolutely.
start to be very, very important as we move into the year.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. You said you're reminding me of my grandmother yelling at the TV, "Why are you even covering this?" Like that probably will need to be our point. Why are you even covering this? Um, but let me get into something that I was covering at the end of the year, and there may have been some developments by the time this hits the airwaves, Lisa, but I have when your sons are in every sport under the sun, you kind of follow the pros in their sports. And so have been following Draymond Green and his indefinite suspension at the time, which I think is really interesting because look, we're not talking about a player that has not and is not performing. Draymond Green is a power forward, four-time NBA champion. He's two-time Olympian, what I think three or four-time NBA All-Star. And back in December during a game, he struck the Phoenix Sun center Yusef Nurkic in the face while being guarded, right? And I saw it. I actually saw it live because we had the game on at the time. And it was a flagrant foul, and he was ejected from the game, right? Now, you know, basketball players get physical. I mean, they don't get as physical as American football players, but they do get physical. But it's different when this is like your fifth or sixth uh, ejection, not just flagrant foul, ejection due to flagrant fouls. And so I think it's interesting when, every franchise is its own business, but yet it still has its line to the NBA. It still has its line to the NBA Players Association. And with Draymond, I think it's been quite interesting, Lisa. And even if you had not seen it, even if you didn't even know who he was, consider professional player that has a history of ejections due to violence against teammates and non-teammates.
Okay.
And now the story gets interesting because at what point does it get to a level that you have to figure out what to do and how to do it? Especially
Mm-hmm.
when you have someone that's being paid so much, paid very well on a roster that is extremely expensive. They're used to being champions. And I'm like, what happens when somebody gets hurt so badly that someone has to be held accountable at a higher level? I'm floored by this brother that it's very interesting. And people keep saying he needs help. And I'm like, let me think about that.
Like, what do you mean? Think about it. Like or I guess when they say he needs help, what are they meaning?
Well, I'm taking it as like, even when it comes to, major commentators on, ESPN, so forth, it's the assumption that it is a mental health concern that he needs help with. Now, I don't know. It could be whether it's, maybe it's his professional life as a player and something under some layers in his personal life that's causing this behavior, et cetera. But what's interesting is I think it was Charles Barkley that brought up the point that you see Draymond being violent outside of basketball and off the hardwood. It is very clear that it's happening there and nowhere else. It's not like he's,
Mm,
at the club after the game having a good time with a couple of drinks and he's being violent there or,
okay.
what have you. It
Okay.
is solely connected to basketball. And so the assumption is he needs counseling, he needs some type of mental health intervention, so forth. And I don't know that that's necessarily true. And part of that is because the after game interviews that he continues to have, he is not remorseful and he is not apologetic. He makes it very clear. Yes, I did that. No, I will not apologize. I don't apologize for anything that I do. It happened and this is how I play. That to me escapes the need or the wraparound of he needs help because this is a mental health concern. And my fear is that from someone that is I myself am a professional coach. It freaks me out a little bit because I've been that person that was called in to coach someone about behavior, whether it was coaching or it rose to the level of a mental health concern where you brought in a mental health
Mm-hmm.
professional. You're not going to see change from someone who does not see a need for change. He feels like this is just physical play and this is how it works.
Okay. Okay. So you're not supporting the behavior, but what you're saying is the categorization of the behavior is perhaps mental health related is likely not it based on what you're observing.
I don't think it's it. I don't think it's it. It's not like, oh, Draymond just snaps on people. Well,
Mm,
it's very clearly in a basketball context. It's not happening anywhere else. This is a choice. And so, it's not as if, oh, he literally was almost unconscionable outside of himself and then he snaps back and, oh my God, I struck someone. No, he's very clear. I did that. That's it. I did that. And so to me, the lack of remorse, it gets interesting because the punitive nature of all the feedback, it just keeps rising. And so the NBA has tried to keep its hands off of it in order for the Golden State Warriors to handle it as a ball club. Well, the behavior just continues on. And so it's like, okay, Warriors, since you're not going to handle it, now the NBA has to handle it. Now the
mm,
NBA is saying, okay, you're suspended indefinitely, which to me connotes, okay, if you're suspended indefinitely, the clock is ticking, your money is missing, and it's based on certain benchmarks of behavioral change. This man has told y'all he does not see a need to change his behavior. So why would you build in time to expect change of behavior? So now I feel like, shit, if I were Adam Silver, the commissioner of the NBA, I guess y'all are going to just have to keep him suspended until the contract rides itself out. I don't know how many years are left, but there are years left. Ride it
mm.
out because this person does not see a need for behavioral change. I think it's the
Interesting.
most fascinating case. And I think it gets even more fascinating since we were just talking about media. I think it gets even more fascinating because every picture that I see on the media, when they're not playing the clip of the actual offense, the clips of the media have him looking like the stereotypical angry, loose cannon black man.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not okay with that stereotype at all. And at the same time, is his behavior feeding a stereotype that I don't want to succumb to? It's
Interesting.
very
So the
fascinating.
media is only presenting him in one way. That feeds into white created stereotypes about black men, and yet he is not remorseful about his behavior, and so is
Mm-mm.
himself feeding into that stereotype. Do you think there's any intentionality there on his part where he's like, well, fuck it, this is the only way I'm represented, so I'm just going to lean into it, like, to
See,
spite
that's what I
him?
wonder. But and I hear you on that. I wonder too. I think that can be some of the case. But at what point, because we're talking about business and we're talking about lots of money. At what point have you made so much money already that hundreds of thousands of dollars not being there doesn't matter to you anymore?
Mm,
Like, every game is a loss in paycheck. Every game you don't play is a loss in paycheck, and every fine is a loss in money. Let me tell you something. No, the the amount of fines that he is paying is more than most people will ever
wow.
witness in life,
Wow.
and he's still okay with it. And so when I think about, so last week I did a training and we always include the art of the apology, how to apologize for bad behavior, especially when it comes to DEI topics. And he is complete opposite of every single tenet of an appropriate apology based on the science. So when Ohio State did their study and they had like 6 elements of an effective apology, and the goal is to have as many of those 6 elements as possible, none of them. He has the worst apologies known to
Mm,
anybody. Okay, he does not regret what he did. He doesn't explain what went wrong because he doesn't think anything went wrong. Doesn't take responsibility for his behavior. Will not ever change. He's made it clear, I will not change my behavior. He has not offered to change it or repair anything. None of it. He ever all of the 6 he works completely against. And I'm like, how is that amplified when you show up? Yes, I
Yep,
know the
yep.
league is overwhelmingly men of color, but how does that show up when you're in the media? You're a very recognizable face and you show up as a 6'6" African American male.
Yeah.
It shows up
Yes,
differently.
it's this yeah, it's so complicated, right? Because it's not self-serving his behavior, like it's he's
No.
not getting anything from it, but I could see why he would be like, well, if this is what you think of me, then this is what you're going to get. And so it just kind of compounds every week.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
then, like it's it's detrimental in terms of the way in which that stereotype is getting perpetuated in people's minds. And what we talked about AI on the last episode and the
Oh,
way that,
yeah. Hmm.
AI amplifies stereotype. And it sounds like whether he's intentionally doing it or not, that's what's happening here. And what do you do about that as a team, as the NBA? And the NBA is run by white people, right? Like a friend of mine wrote her dissertation on the NBA being one of the most racist business organizations in the country, because of the ways in which it's owned and run primarily by white people, and the
Hmm.
vast majority of players are African American. And so, I mean, you could say the
Hmm.
same for the NFL, right? Like, there's some highly problematic racial dynamics going on there in terms of who has power and who doesn't.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Hmm. Yep. Yep. Absolutely. And you obviously have a lot of very well off men of color that are playing, but obviously the owners and the people that are writing the checks make much more than they do. So, yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
compared to the rest of the world, you are extremely well off, but compared to the owners, not as much. So, I
right.
am
And the other piece, um, you go.
no, I was just thinking about how it's, feeding into that stereotype, even when it comes to the NBA Players Association, who was also overwhelmingly men of color, and they being kind of the a governing body that gets to weigh in on um, opinions and try to help guide or advise the commissioner in the front office of the NBA. Well, it is exactly
Right.
that, advising. It's not mandating. So even their power is to a point, so
Yeah.
anyway.
Well, an individual men of color having wealth isn't the same as systemic power for
Exactly.
people of color in the United States, right? And I think that gets mistaken, right? Like, well,
Exactly.
you have money, so you have power. Well, to some degree, but not really when we think about, small fish, big pond kind of thing. Um,
Right. 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 Right.
yeah. Okay, so that's we gave you a lot to think about in this episode,
We did.
particularly the second two phases there. I think I need to think about this NBA one more because I do not follow the NBA, so I am not connected to that. But I do think it's an interesting and very complex situation when you kind of factor in um,
Hmm.
stereotypes, apologies, remorse, mental health, what else is going on there, and then of course racism on top of that. So, well, we just started you off there with a big bang for 2024. That got deep and complicated pretty quickly.
Real quick. Real quick. Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, well, I hope that you all enjoyed this first episode of 2024 and you are looking forward to a big and banner year as Shauna and I are. But
Yeah.
I ask you this every week, Shauna, but how can folks get a hold of us?
Yeah, well, we're going to keep telling them, Lisa. We're going to keep telling them. Make sure you go to YouTube and find us, unfazed, unedited, with the brackets around the un and unfazed. Unfazed, unedited. Find us there. Comment, like, share with other folks. Also, you can find us on Instagram, Unfazed Pod. LinkedIn, you can find us there as well, the Unfazed Pod. And I really enjoyed the LinkedIn page because that's where you get to see what we're thinking about in between episodes. So make sure that you get filled in there on LinkedIn. If you have a question or something that you would like for us to discuss on the podcast. We've done that before. Send us an email at info@unfazedpodcast.com. It comes straight to us and we can see what your question or comment is. Check out our website, unfazedpodcast.com, where you can find both the 115 in the archive as well as our new shows. But we always encourage you, please make sure you leave a review of the podcast, like, subscribe, all of that. More importantly, we think that oftentimes this is great fodder for conversation in your professional world. So please take that with you back to your coworkers. You might feel a little bit skittish about bringing up a topic. Well, you can put it on me and Lisa. If we bring up the topic, tell folks to listen to it, and then you can start from there, right?
Yep.
But please share this with folks in other phases of your life. So happy New Year, and until next week.
All right. See you next week.